My wife walked out on us, claiming she needed to find herself and boasting that I'd just be here waiting for her return. But later, karma took its toll. Let me tell you how my world got turned upside down. I'm Alex, 34, and until recently I thought I was in a secure marriage with Sarah, who's 32. We met back in high school, started dating young, and despite the ups and downs, I believed we'd built something strong. Together, we have a 5-year-old daughter, Emma, who is hands down the best part of my life. Sarah and I both work full-time, working hard to give Emma a stable home. You know the drill: work, bills, the daily grind. We'd been talking for ages about doing something special as a family. We planned to take a few months off, travel across the country, reconnect, and spend some genuine quality time together. This wasn't just a pipe dream. We'd mapped everything out and saved up enough to make it happen. I thought we were on the same page, both excited for it. But man, was I wrong. Lately, I'd noticed Sarah seemed different. Nothing obvious, but she was distant, zoning out mid-conversation, staying up late on her phone, saying she was stressed or tired whenever I asked what was wrong. I assumed it was work or just the wear and tear from managing everything. After all, we'd both been doing the same daily grind for years, so I didn't think much of it. I figured once we got away on this trip, we'd get back to normal. Big mistake on my part. One day I came home from work, and Emma was already at my parents' place since I was working late, so the house was quiet when I walked in. I put my stuff down and headed into the kitchen, maybe to start dinner or catch up on some bills. And there it was, a note on the kitchen counter, just a simple piece of paper folded in half with my name scrawled on it. Nothing fancy, but when I saw her handwriting, my stomach sank. I picked it up, barely breathing, because something told me this was bad. The note was short, just a few lines, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. It read, "Alex, I need some time to figure things out. I'm sorry, but I have to do this on my own. I'll be back when I'm ready." That was it. No details about when she'd be back, why she was leaving, or even where she was going. She was just gone. I can't even describe the shock. One minute, I thought I'd be sitting down to dinner with my wife, planning our trip, and the next, she was gone. And it wasn't the kind of gone where she'd just gone out to cool off. No, this was a full-blown disappearing act, like she'd planned it all out. I looked around, half expecting to see her bags by the door or her car outside, but everything of hers was gone, and her car was nowhere to be seen. I just stood there, reading and rereading that note, trying to understand it. It didn't feel real. I kept thinking, there's no way she'd just leave like this. But there it was, in her handwriting, and the silence in the house was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I checked her closet, hoping it was some kind of twisted joke, but I could tell she'd taken a good amount of clothes, not everything, but enough to show she wasn't just stepping out for a breather. Of course, I called her. The phone rang a few times, then went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep calm, asking her to call me back so we could talk. I mean, how do you even react to something like this? I didn't want to lose it on her voicemail, I just wanted answers. But after a while, when she didn't call back, I tried again, and each time it went straight to voicemail. After a few tries, I finally gave up and called my brother, Steve. He's always been the steady one, the guy who stays calm when everything's falling apart. I told him Sarah was gone, and he was silent for a second before asking me to read him the note. I did, and he let out a long sigh, like he'd seen it coming. But for me, it was like the ground had been pulled out from under my feet. "Alex, listen to me," Steve said. "You need to secure the accounts and protect yourself. We don't know how long she's planning to be gone, and if she's taken money already, she could take more." He was right. I hadn't even thought about the money. My head was spinning. But after he said that, I couldn't ignore it. If she'd left with no warning, there was no telling what she might do next. I walked through the house, looking to see if she'd taken anything else. I don't know why, I guess I needed to see the full extent of the damage, but aside from some clothes, personal things, and the cash, she hadn't taken much. It was like she'd stripped her life down to the basics and walked out. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the last few months, searching for signs I might have missed, anything that hinted this was coming, but there was nothing. Sure, she'd been distant, but not like someone who was about to abandon her family. I kept hoping I'd wake up and realize this was some messed up dream, but the reality was impossible to ignore. The hardest part was figuring out what to tell Emma. She was too young to understand why her mum would leave, and I didn't have an answer. The next day I picked her up from my parents' house, trying to act normal. I told her that her mum had gone on a little trip and would be back soon, even though I didn't have a clue if that was true. She didn't ask too many questions, but I could tell she was confused, and honestly, so was I. All I knew for sure was that things would never be the same again. Waking up the next morning felt like getting hit by a truck. For a second, I thought maybe it was all a nightmare, but then I saw the note still on the counter, right where I'd left it. Sarah was gone, and I had no idea when or if she'd ever come back. It didn't feel real. I had to face the reality that my wife had just walked away, left our life, our daughter, and everything we'd built over the years. Emma woke up as cheerful as ever, blissfully unaware of the upheaval around her. I forced a smile, trying to keep things normal, though it felt like my entire world was hanging by a thread. She asked if Mummy was still on her trip, and I nodded vaguely, not sure how to explain it to a 5-year-old. I was barely beginning to process it myself. After breakfast, I tried calling Sarah again, only to get her voicemail like the night before. I left another message, asking her to at least let me know she was safe, though something told me she wasn't going to respond anytime soon. The silence was deafening. I decided to reach out to her closest friend, Jen, hoping she might know something. Jen and Sarah had been friends since college, and if anyone had a clue, I figured it would be her. I called, doing my best to keep it together, but my voice cracked as I explained the situation. "Wait, what?" She just left. Jen sounded genuinely shocked, caught completely off guard. "I haven't heard anything about this, Alex." She didn't say a word to me about needing space or wanting to leave. Her reaction confirmed my worst fears. Sarah hadn't even confided in her closest friend. This wasn't a sudden decision, it was something she'd planned and hidden. Jen said she'd try reaching out to Sarah to see if she'd answer, but that didn't bring me much comfort. Sarah had vanished without telling anyone, with no hints of when or if she'd come back, and now it was on me to keep things together. The rest of the day was a blur, as I tried to act normal while feeling like my whole life had been turned upside down. I took Emma to the park, played with her as I always did, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time she laughed or asked a question, it was a sharp reminder of Sarah leaving us behind, leaving me to answer questions I didn't have answers to. That night, after Emma was asleep, I finally sat down to process everything. I thought about all the times Sarah had seemed distant in the past few months, staying up late on her phone, telling me she felt stuck and needed to find herself. I'd assumed she was just stressed and had offered to talk, to help, but she'd brushed me off. Now, looking back, I realized she must have been planning this for a while. Alone in the quiet house, it hit me how utterly alone I felt. This wasn't some small fight we could bounce back from. This was real, and it was tearing my life apart in ways I hadn't expected. I tried to remember what Steve had told me the night before about securing the accounts and protecting what was left. I'd already frozen our joint accounts and cancelled shared credit cards, but there was still a nagging feeling that I hadn't done enough. So I logged into our bank accounts to take a closer look. She'd already withdrawn a sizable chunk of our savings, not everything, but enough to leave a serious dent. I'd worked hard to save that money, and now half of it was just gone. Anger and betrayal boiled up inside me as I pictured Sarah somewhere, carefree, living a new life while I was left picking up the pieces. Curious, I checked her social media to see if she'd posted anything about her plans or whereabouts. Part of me didn't want to know, but I couldn't help myself. And there it was, a fresh Instagram post from just hours earlier. She was on a beach, wearing sunglasses, grinning with the caption, "Finally feeling free." I stared at the photo, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the Sarah I thought I knew. She was out there enjoying herself while I was at home, trying to explain her absence to our daughter. The comments on her post were full of friends cheering her on, saying things like, "You deserve it." And living your truth, it felt like I was the only one who saw the whole picture, that she'd just left her family. I took a screenshot and sent it to Steve, who called me almost immediately to check if I was okay. I wasn't, not by a long shot, but I told him I was handling it. What else could I say? I wasn't about to break down on the phone, even though that's exactly how I felt. Steve told me I needed to think about my next steps, that I couldn't just wait for her to decide if she wanted to come back. He was right. I couldn't keep pretending this was temporary, like she'd just gone on a quick trip and would return any day now. She'd made her choice, and I had to figure out how to move forward, but it was easier said than done. The following days were spent going through the motions, taking care of Emma, going to work, and pretending everything was fine. I was barely holding it together, and every time I looked at Emma, I felt a crushing weight of responsibility. I'd always pictured us as a family, working through things together, but now it was just me and her. I had no idea how to explain any of this to her, and I didn't even know if I could. One night, after putting Emma to bed, I let myself feel it all: the anger, the sadness, the betrayal. I thought about all the years Sarah and I had spent building a life together, all the sacrifices, and now it felt like none of it had mattered to her. She was out there, free, while I was left alone, trying to hold it all together for our daughter. That's when I realized I couldn't keep waiting around for her to decide what she wanted. Sarah had made her choice, and it didn't include me or Emma. It hurt like hell, but I knew I had to focus on what was best for us. I wasn't going to let her keep us in limbo, waiting for her to decide if we were worth coming back for. The next day I called a lawyer. I wasn't sure if I was ready to file for divorce, but I needed to understand my options to figure out what I could do to protect myself and Emma. I felt like I was finally beginning to make progress, even if only in small ways. This wasn't the future I'd envisioned, but it was the reality I was now dealing with, and I was determined to do whatever it took to make it work for Emma and me. After speaking to the lawyer, I thought clarity would start to emerge, that maybe I'd feel a sense of control. If anything, though, it only made me more aware of how far Sarah had drifted. This wasn't just a phase; she had made her decision, leaving me to handle the aftermath. The lawyer outlined my options, primarily legal terms that felt overwhelming, but the main takeaway was clear: if Sarah didn't return, I needed to prepare for a potential divorce. Yet there were still so many unresolved questions swirling in my mind, keeping me up at night. Where was she? What was she even doing? Sure, she'd posted that one Instagram photo of herself on the beach, all smiles and living her best life. But that didn't explain why she'd left or how long she planned on staying away. So, one night, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I logged into Sarah's old email account. I know it sounds bad, but I was desperate. I needed answers, and since she wasn't providing any, this felt like my only option. Besides, I knew she rarely used that email except for spam and random subscriptions. If there was any clue, I figured it might be there. The inbox was mostly what I expected: endless spam, newsletters, and ads. But as I scrolled, I noticed a few messages that stood out. They were notifications from a dating app, showing messages she'd received. My heart sank as I opened one. It was from a guy named Mike, and it wasn't just a friendly chat. They'd been talking for weeks, maybe longer. There were more messages from other men too, stretching back over the past few months. Reading through them, I felt a sickening realization settle in: she had been leading a double life. Here I was, thinking we were just a normal couple planning a trip to reconnect, and she'd been out there forging connections with strangers. The message timestamps even lined up with the times she'd seemed stressed or needed a night out with friends. As if that wasn't bad enough, I kept looking and found a link to a shared photo album in one of the emails. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. The photos were all recent: her at the beach, at a fancy bar, with some guy's arm draped around her shoulders. It was like staring at a stranger. This wasn't the Sarah I knew, the woman I'd planned to spend my life with. She had become someone who could abandon her family without a second thought. I shut the laptop and just sat there, trying to process it all. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious, all mixed into a mess of emotions that I couldn't contain. Part of me wanted to call her, scream at her, demand answers, but I knew it would be pointless. She'd made her choice, and no amount of shouting would change that. The next morning, I tried to act normal for Emma's sake. She still didn't know the details, thank God, and I didn't want her picking up on my anger or confusion. But every time she asked about her mum, each innocent question, every hopeful look on her face, it shattered me a little more. How was I supposed to explain that her mum had chosen a different life, one that didn't include us? Later that day, Steve called just to check in. I hadn't told him about what I'd discovered, mostly out of embarrassment. It felt like I'd been the last to see what was going on. But Steve could sense something was off, and eventually I spilled everything. I told him about the dating app, the photos, the double life she'd been leading. He was quiet for a moment, then finally said, "Alex, you didn't deserve any of this. She's the one who messed up, not you." It was comforting to hear, but it didn't exactly solve anything. I still had to figure out my next steps. The lawyer had mentioned that if Sarah didn't come back, I could pursue divorce on grounds of abandonment. But the thought of formally ending things felt heavy. I'd never imagined myself in this situation. We'd built a life, made promises, had a child, and now it was all slipping through my fingers. That night I lay awake, running through countless scenarios in my head. What if I confronted her about everything? What if I just filed for divorce and ended it? But with every possibility, I kept coming back to Emma. She was the one who mattered now, the one who deserved stability in her life. I wasn't going to let Sarah's mess taint Emma's childhood. The next morning, I took Emma to the park. She deserved a day where everything felt normal, even if only for a few hours. Watching her play, laughing and running around as if everything was fine, reminded me just how much I needed to be strong for her. She was my reason to keep pushing forward, even as the rest of my life felt like it was collapsing. At one point, Emma ran over to me, her innocent eyes filled with a question I'd known was coming. "Daddy, when is Mummy coming home?" I took a deep breath, feeling that pang of sadness mixed with frustration. Kneeling down, I tried to keep calm. "I don't know, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile, "but I promise I'll always be here." "Okay," she nodded, but I could tell it wasn't the answer she wanted. She just hugged me tightly, and I hugged her back, hoping somehow I could shield her from the reality of everything happening. That evening I finally made up my mind. I couldn't keep waiting for Sarah to decide if we were worth coming back to. I was going to move forward, whatever that meant, to protect Emma and myself. Whether it was filing for divorce or just moving on emotionally, I didn't know yet, but I couldn't keep living stuck between the life I'd had and the one I now faced. As I sat there thinking about the future, I realized maybe this was my chance to build something new, a life where Emma and I could be happy, even if it was just the two of us. Thanksgiving was approaching quickly, and honestly I wasn't sure how to handle it. The holidays are a big thing in my family. We always gather, eat way too much, and talk about everything going on. But this year would be different. Everyone knew Sarah was gone, but they didn't know the full story. I hadn't told anyone about the dating app, the strangers, or the beach photos, and I didn't intend to. It was too humiliating, and I didn't want their pity. I just wanted to get through the day without breaking down. I decided to bring Emma to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. She'd been asking about her mum, and each time I'd just say Sarah was still on her trip, and that for now, it was just the two of us. She seemed to accept it, but I could tell she missed Sarah, and that broke me. I couldn't make her any promises about when or if her mum would be back. I wasn't even sure if I wanted her back at this point. Thanksgiving morning, as I was getting Emma ready and trying to keep my own emotions in check, a text from Sarah popped up on my phone. I hadn't heard a word from her since she left, so seeing her name there made my stomach drop. All she'd written was, "I'd like to come by and see Emma today," just like that. No apology, no explanation, nothing to address what she'd done. It was a casual message, as if everything was perfectly normal. I stared at my phone, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to tell her no, to remind her that she couldn't just show up whenever she felt like it. But Emma was 5, and she didn't deserve to be hurt any more than she already was. I responded, "We'll be at my parents' place. You can come by if you want, but don't expect everything to be normal," she replied with a simple okay, and that was it. When we arrived at my parents' house, everything looked the same as usual. My mum was busy in the kitchen, and my dad was in his favorite chair, watching the parade with my brother, Steve. They greeted me with sympathetic smiles, but didn't push me to talk. They knew forcing me wouldn't help. Still, I could see the worry in my mum's eyes as she kept glancing at me with that expression she had when she wanted to fix something but couldn't. Emma was happily playing with her cousins when Sarah finally showed up. She walked in looking completely composed, dressed up and smiling as if she'd just come back from a weekend away, rather than being absent for an entire month. She went straight to Emma, scooping her up in a big hug, and Emma's face lit up. I felt a mix of anger and relief, angry that Sarah acted like everything was fine, but relieved that, at least for a moment, Emma was happy. The family was watching, and the silence was thick. My mum broke it by politely offering Sarah a drink, which she accepted. Then everyone sat around the table, and I could feel them all waiting for someone to say something, to acknowledge the obvious tension in the room. But Sarah carried on as if she were just any other guest, casually chatting about her trip and saying how great it was to see everyone. Finally, I couldn't hold back. I leaned over and quietly said, "So that's it. You're just going to act like nothing happened?" She looked at me, barely fazed, and replied calmly, "Alex, I needed this. I needed time to figure things out," as though she were explaining an extended coffee break, not why she'd abandoned her family. I couldn't keep my voice down any longer. "Figure things out? You walked out on Emma and me without a word. You've been gone for weeks, and now you just show up for Thanksgiving like everything's fine." The room went silent, even the kids. For the first time, Sarah looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, but she kept her cool. "I'm here now, aren't I? I wanted to be here for Emma, to show her I still care." Steve was glaring at her, and my parents' disappointment was obvious, but Sarah brushed it off, turning her attention back to Emma and distracting her with stories about her so-called adventures. It was clear to me then that she wasn't going to take responsibility or give an apology. To her, this was just a minor hiccup, something she could sweep under the rug. The rest of the meal was tense. Every time Sarah tried to make small talk, someone would either ignore her or give her a short answer. She laughed it off, but it was obvious she felt the distance. After dessert, she finally stood up and said she had to leave because she had other plans. Emma looked disappointed but hugged her mum, asking when she'd see her again. Sarah glanced at me, and for a second it seemed like she might actually say something meaningful. But all she said was, "Soon, sweetie." "I'll be back soon," and just like that, she left us again. After she was gone, my mum pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I wanted to say yes to reassure her, but I couldn't. I was angry, hurt, and felt like I was watching my life unravel in real time. My dad gave me a pat on the back, his silent way of showing support, even if he didn't know what to say. On the drive home, Emma was quiet, just staring out the window with a sad look on her face. I tried to cheer her up, pointing out the holiday lights and talking about decorating our place, but she barely responded. When we got home, she went straight to her room without a word. I sat alone in the living room, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for family and gratitude, but all I felt was emptiness. Sarah had come in, stirred everything up, and left again, leaving me to deal with the fallout. It was then that I realized this was going to be our new reality, me holding everything together while she drifted in and out whenever it suited her. I was done waiting, done hoping she'd change, done pretending things would be okay. I didn't know exactly what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to build a life for Emma and me, one that didn't involve Sarah's half-hearted appearances. We deserved better than that. After Thanksgiving, something shifted in me. I wasn't as angry as I'd been when Sarah first left. It was more like acceptance, maybe even a bit of relief. She had shown me who she really was, a woman who could abandon her family, pop in when it was convenient, and then leave without a second thought. It felt like I was watching a stranger move through my life, and I was done letting her come and go. I'd spent enough time trying to understand, enough nights lying awake wondering why. Now, it was time to focus on Emma and me. The days turned into weeks, and I began settling into a new routine. I found a rhythm for Emma and me. We'd have dinner together, make her favorite meals, and do story time before bed. I wanted her to feel safe, to know that I was there no matter what. My family was around a lot more, especially Steve, who'd come by just to hang out or help me fix things around the house. It was simple, but it felt good, like we were building something stable, even if it was just the two of us. And then, just as I was getting used to this new normal, Sarah showed up again. I was at work when she texted, saying she needed to talk and asked if I could meet her that night. No explanation, no heads up, just another demand for my time. I was tempted to ignore her, but a part of me was curious. What was she going to say this time? Was this another brief visit, or did she have some other excuse lined up? That night, I met her at a small coffee shop. She was already sitting there when I walked in, looking not great. She was dressed in her usual I've got it all together outfit, but something was off. She looked tired, more exhausted than I'd ever seen her, and there was an uneasiness about her I hadn't noticed before. She barely let me sit down before diving right into her story. "Alex, I made a mistake. I thought I could figure myself out, find some kind of meaning, but it didn't go as I planned." I sat there, silent, letting her talk. She rambled on about how nothing had worked out as she'd hoped, how she'd drifted from some of her friends, and that life on her own was much harder than she'd imagined. Apparently, one of the guys she was involved with had conned her out of money, promising to invest it or something, and now she was facing financial trouble. It all sounded like some twisted rom-com plot gone horribly wrong, but this was real life. Eventually, she got to her main point. "I was thinking, maybe I could come back. Just until I get back on my feet," she said, as if she hadn't turned our lives upside down for her personal journey. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "So let me get this straight," I said, looking her square in the eye. "You left us to go find yourself, got tangled up with some guy who scammed you, and now you're back because you need a place to crash." She flinched but tried to brush it off. "It's not like that, Alex. I just thought maybe we could work things out. I want to make things right with you and Emma." I shook my head, feeling oddly calm. "You want to make things right, Sarah? You left without a second thought. You abandoned me, left me to explain to our daughter why her mum wasn't around. You showed up on Thanksgiving acting like everything was fine, and now you want to come back because you're out of money." She looked down, clearly not prepared for my bluntness. Maybe she thought I'd just let her back in, no questions asked. But I couldn't. Not for her, and certainly not after everything she'd done. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, feeling anything but sorry. "Emma and I have been doing okay on our own. We've moved on, or at least started to. It's not fair to her or to me to let you come back just because things didn't work out as you planned." She tried to convince me, saying she'd changed, that she was ready to be a family again, but I saw through it. She wasn't different, she was just facing the consequences of her choices, looking for an easy way out. But life doesn't work like that. As I stood up to leave, she grabbed my arm. "Alex, please, don't do this. I'm begging you." I glanced down at her hand on my arm, feeling a strange sense of closure. "Sarah, you left. That was your choice, and now I have to do what's best for Emma. That means not letting her get hurt again." I walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks, like a weight had finally been lifted. I'd spent so much time questioning what I'd done wrong, why she'd left, wondering if there was anything I could have done. But in that moment I realized that some decisions are out of your control, and the only thing left to do is move forward. Later that night I called Steve and filled him in. He let out a low whistle, laughing a bit. "Man, I knew she'd come crawling back eventually. She just didn't get it. She burned all her bridges already." And that was exactly it. She'd severed all ties with me, and now she was realizing there was no return. I didn't feel sorry for her. Instead, I felt relieved that I could finally close that chapter and focus on what really mattered, building a safe, loving life for Emma and me. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a change in myself. I wasn't angry or bitter anymore. I felt like I'd finally let go of all the weight and all the questions. Emma and I were okay, really okay, and that was enough. Karma has a way of working things out, and Sarah was now dealing with the results of her choices. As much as she wanted to come back, that wasn't an option. Not anymore. So there it is. Life doesn't always go the way you hope, and sometimes people let you down in ways you can't foresee. But in the end, I realized I'm stronger than I thought. Emma and I are going to be just fine.